Good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for coming to tonight's event. We have an amazing speaker who is going to be talking to us about some serious issues that we're facing. Of course, everything is serious now with the re-election of Barack Obama, but these are some things that kind of cross all party lines and all affiliations, because these are issues that affect our property, that affect our children, that affect our homes, our state, etc., and things that we actually have control over. So before we get to that, let's have our pledges done, and I would like to welcome the father of our new senator, Ted Cruz.
Please have a seat. And before we do the pledges, I just have to take a second and say thank you to each and every one of you, because it was because of your passion, because of your support, because of your hard work that we have Ted Cruz as our next U.S. Senator. Thank you very much. Let's first of all pledge allegiance to the U.S. flag. Let's stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. And then I'd like to bring up Sandy Ness real quick for one quick announcement before we get started.
Yeah, this is for the Far North Galaxy Party people. We have a new venue for our meetings. We've been meeting at the North Dallas Police Station, and we kind of outgrew that. And so now we have a really wonderful space that's 6,200 square feet at Valley View Shopping Mall. They have a wonderful room that they've turned into a community room. It's on the second level, and our meetings are going to be then set that it's going to be the third Thursday of every month. And so that's going to make it a lot easier for people. And Mimi will be putting out information about exactly, where it is. And it's like where all the hallways come in to Valley View, right in the middle. So if you just get that far, you just look around, and there's a huge room that says community room there. So we're excited about that.
I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce some of our elected officials in the room. Please stand. Laura Maska, Richardson City Council, Mayor Pro Tem. Jared Patterson, Jackson City Council, Mayor Pro Tem. Randall Jennings, SREC Committeeman at 16. Scott Dunn, City of Richardson City Council. CCCD Trustee. City of Richardson Council, Place 6. Anyone else that we did not get on our list that would like to be recognized? Elected official? Okay. Well, let's get started. We're running a little late, so I will save most of what I had to say and give our speaker all of the opportunity to blow your mind about what is going on in America. I will put this on the Garland Tea Party website because what we know as Agenda 21 in the United States is better termed as a new consensus, New America, a new consensus. And that is the plan that the United States is going by that is actually implementing Agenda 21. We've had successes. The city of Garland was the first city in the state of Texas to be removed from IGLEI. So we have been there in this process against this monster. I call it a monster because it's too big to talk about in one night. So what I will say is, when you are in your localities fighting this issue, I highly encourage you to refer to your document instead of the Agenda 21 document but it's very important that you understand the concept of Agenda 21 so that when you read your local document, you know exactly which part is being implemented into your city. So just a little kernel of help. We spent about 6 months on this project, and it wasn't until we figured that out when we could really start communicating with our elected officials who know absolutely nothing about this topic. So, having said that, I'd like to bring up our speaker, Cathie Adams, an amazing woman who has been out there on the forefront fighting for conservative issues, the current president of Eagle Forum, and many, many, many other things Ms. Adams has done, also helping with Ted Cruz. Her organization is critical in helping families and conservatives get active in the governance of people, which our government has forgotten about. So, having said that, I will let Ms. Adams tell you more about what she has done and what she brings as far as educating you on Agenda 21. So let's welcome Cathie Adams.
A lady who speaks also on this topic, and let me just tell you that you could hear a dozen people talk on this topic, and you would learn new things from each and every person. So thank you, Katrina, for the sweet introduction, also, most importantly, for your friendship, and oh, wasn't it fun to go up to Washington and watch that swearing in of our United States Senator Ted Cruz. Two sign-up sheets going around. There's a red one and a blue one, and they don't have to cross the aisles, but please make it go all the way to the back. I appreciate that. And then we will keep you apprised of what we're doing in Austin, because we have volunteers who are already at work on parts of this Agenda 21 as we speak in Austin, Texas on our behalf. So it's very important that we communicate with you even after today. Now, let me just give you a bit of a background. I've been attending United Nations meetings since 1995, and little did I know that I stepped right in the midst of it when a friend of mine by the name of Henry said, "Cathie, you've got to go to Kyoto, Japan." And I said, "What for, Henry?" And he said, "Because they're talking about climate change and it's very important." And I said, "Well, what do I know about that topic?" And he said, "You will learn." And oh my goodness, have I had to learn. And so we will talk about some of that background so that we can put into the proper context this topic of Agenda 21 so that you can talk about it without, as Katrina said, even having to say Agenda 21, you know how to define it. And then you will also know how to go to your own local documents and find it. Oftentimes you'll find it listed as something like Tyler 2020. Those kind of nebulous sounding terms. But anyway, all of this began with what is known as Earth Summits. And the United Nations has been holding those since 1972. They, of course, had a very strident agenda with that. It was not something that was just happening along the way. The agenda with the United Nations is always a foregone conclusion. It's a matter of hoodwinking the nations of the world into their agenda. And you will see very clearly by the time we finish what that is. So in 1972, they met in Stockholm, Sweden. And then 20 years later, they had a second Earth Summit. That one was in Rio de Janeiro. Now, there were 172 governments that participated and 108 heads of state. Folks, that's huge. One of those heads of state was then our president, George H.W. Bush, who went to Rio de Janeiro. The conference in Rio was headed by a man by the name of Maurice Strong, and we'll see a bit more about him in a moment. And there were two documents that George H.W. Bush went to Rio to sign. One was the Climate Change Treaty, and two was Agenda 21. So that had to be significant, didn't it? What did he say in his State of the Union address? Something about a new world order, okay? And so that was a very significant meeting in 1992. And then in 2012, just last year, they went back to Rio. The United Nations went back to Rio for a very major meeting. They were hoping to seal a legally binding document. The only one under the Climate Change Treaty right now is the Kyoto Protocol. That's the one that pertains to only 37 nations. Only its sunset last December. And the United Nations decided, well, those who volunteer, those nations who volunteer can continue that going. And you will see more of why that is significant in just a moment. But anyway, in Rio de Janeiro last June, the United Nations met again. They did not walk away with a legally binding document, but that is still their goal. I promised we would learn something more about Canadian Maurice Strong. You see, he is a Canadian, and here's something about his philosophy. Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class. Who is he targeting? The middle class. And why would he do that? Isn't there an economic system that targets the middle class so that what is left is only a ruling elite and a working class? There is an economic system that does that. And what he says to describe the middle class is that we are people who live in suburban housing. Ooh, that's bad. Why? Because he said it's not sustainable. Now, to tell you something else about this man, Maurice Strong, you can also see that he is a sponsor of the Earth Charter, along with Mikhail Gorbachev. That Earth Charter is online. It's a very short document. But one woman, who is an artist, thought that it was such a holy document when she read it, that she designed this ark on the bottom right-hand corner. And so that tells you spiritually where Maurice Strong is, and politically where he is, and certainly philosophically where he is, how he thinks. Now, after that 1972 meeting, the Earth Summit wasn't producing quickly enough the kind of results that they wanted. And so the United Nations met again in 1987 at the World Commission on Environment and Development. The woman who headed that particular meeting was the former, well, she's a humanist. She self-proclaimed as a humanist. She also was the first vice president of Socialist International and later became the prime minister of Norway and served a couple of terms. Well, this woman's philosophy, as you see here, in her quote, changing attitudes of people everywhere is a fundamental prerequisite if the priorities of human society and therefore of human government are to be rewritten. Well, is that what we're about? Is that what you thought the United Nations was about? I mean, it was supposed to be a place where nations sit down and make peace, not war, wasn't it? But they're talking about rewriting human government. And so we see also at this meeting, there was a book produced called Our Common Future. And Gro Harlem Brundtland, this woman in that, made it very clear for the first time the phrase sustainable development. She created that phrase. And exactly what it means is rewriting of government, as she says in this phrase here. Sustainable development in picture form is in the top right-hand corner. It is social, economic, and environmental justice, or you can say equity. And when I say equity, it's absolute equity. If you're going to have social equity, what does that mean? And economic equity, you can figure it out. But you combine environmental and it's like, oh my. Let's see more. Sustainable development, according to the United Nations, is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations to meet their own needs. That sounds simple enough until you see how it works. And how it works is a framework of rules and regulations. What is being done to the American economy right now? Rules and regulations are stifling our economy. Businesses are hurting because of more rules and regulations than we know what to do with. So these rules and regulations are being put upon individuals, businesses, and organizations. So no one is outside the purview. I can tell you that children are being taught this agenda very clearly. Here's an American college student who was at a meeting a couple of years ago in Cancun, Mexico. Now here we are in the Mayan Riviera. This girl is living at the top of the world as far as an economic status is concerned. And on her T-shirt, she was very proud to turn around and let me get a picture, liberate the soil. What in the world does that mean? You know, it means leaving it fallow. It doesn't mean tilling it in order to prepare it for seed and water. It means leaving it fallow. Undamming the rivers. You go to the state of California right now, folks, and you will find that that government over there is tearing down dams. Why? Because of endangered species. They need to save those salamanders and those bugs. And that's more important to them than humans, and certainly more important than hydroelectric power. You see, even though it's power that is generated by water, the force of water, the only power that is acceptable to them is wind or solar. That is all. And so, undamming the rivers, that's part of the agenda. Freeing the people. Again, she didn't know how free she was. Living in the freest country in the world. Unplug the empire. What empire do you think she wants to unplug? Again, she's biting the hand that is feeding her and doesn't even understand it because she's been brainwashed in American schools. So, here we are in 1992. Typically, at an Earth Summit or any United Nations meeting, they don't accomplish a whole lot. They'll come up with some kind of platitudes at the end of the meeting, and they'll move closer to what their ultimate goals are. But this particular meeting produced 3 UN treaties. That's huge, huge. And one was to deal with desertification, the second, climate change, and the third, biological diversity. So let's look at these individually. The desertification treaty, if you look at the logo, it looks like acacia trees. Those are the trees that probably Noah built the ark out of. It looks like an arid climate. You think desertification kind of looks like, if you studied orthography, maybe it has something to do with people living maybe a better life in arid conditions. No, it doesn't. It grants the UN control over natural resources and controls 70% of the Earth's length. That's what the desertification treaty does. It was signed by President Clinton in 1994 and ratified unknowingly by the U.S. Senate before Ted Cruz got there. Now, it was in a bundle of 34 treaties in 2000. And my friend Henry called the senator who was handling business on the Senate for that day and said, "Why did you do that? You told me you opposed it, you knew I opposed it, and you told me if it ever even got close to coming up, you'd give me a call, and now I find out it's ratified." Oh, it didn't happen, it didn't happen. So even the man who was handling the affairs on the Senate floor that day did not realize that this treaty was part of the bundle that he oversaw the ratification of. Now, you can get out of it, but, you know, I talked to Dick Armey, that all of us have a familiar name to all of us. And he said that once those tentacles start reaching across from one nation to another, it's almost impossible to get those back. So, we are part of that treaty. The second treaty is the Climate Change Treaty. This one was the only one of the 3 that President George H.W. Bush, the man who called for the New World Order, went to Rio de Janeiro to sign. That and Agenda 21 were the only 2 documents that he went to Rio to sign. Now, it was ratified the same year that he signed it in 1992, and it then led 5 years later to the Kyoto Protocol that gave us the only legally binding treaty that this convention has. As I say, it sunsets now at last December, the end of December. Now nations who only represent about 10% of the carbon emissions around the globe are part of it. And so it's almost useless, but it was important to them that they keep it alive, and you will see reasons why. In 2009, they created, under this climate change treaty, a Green Climate Fund. And we will be seeing a little bit more about that. In 2012, in Doha, Qatar, just last month, the woman who is the executive secretary of this convention said, "We will depart Doha with another concrete step in the right direction." Well, what's the right direction? The complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. She said it. It's no longer Cathie Adams saying it. And you go online, and I found a YouTube of her saying it, and I sent it home to a few thousand of my friends. And it's made its way around the internet. The Green Climate Fund is still developing. The hope is, and I have been talking with a CPA friend, where's Donna Starnes? Yes, there you are. Donna Starnes and her husband are CPAs and understand something called a Tobin tax. That would be a tax on international monetary transactions. That tax alone, folks, can raise trillions of dollars a year. Now, the Green Climate Fund initially is only to raise $100 billion a year. Only, oh my, only $100 billion. But on a global scale, $100 billion? The Tobin tax can raise trillions. They're also looking at other taxing. Things like taxing international airlines. I went to Doha, Qatar on a free ticket, but my husband had to pay taxes because the European Union is dumb enough to be implementing a carbon tax already. The UN wants one. They get a carbon tax, folks, and it's going to escalate every price, and it will destroy the economy of the world. Do you think maybe that's what they're after? So the Green Climate Fund is going to tax something, but the UN doesn't have the ability to do that. It doesn't have the ability to tax. So each time I've been on the National Platform Committee, I put that in there. No taxing by the UN. So this is very serious, and people just don't think it can happen. I was just on the Hill a couple of weeks ago, and had the privilege of visiting with one congressman, actually with his legal staff, and I explained this to him. And I said, we need to get the ball rolling on this, because this is happening very quickly. And they're no longer holding any punches back. And so we've got to get something going. And he said, what do you suggest? And I said, well, a resolution. And the resolution should say this: no money to the United Nations until they back away from the Green Climate Fund. So, now the biodiversity treaty, or the biological diversity treaty, is the third of the treaties that came out of Rio in 1992. It was not ratified, but it's being implemented anyway. And I think it's very important for you to see this map, because the red areas on this map are off limits to humans. And many of you know from your local plans, if you've read them, that people are to live on islands. That suburbia is absolutely not acceptable in the sustainable development world. And again, sustainable development, remember, came out of that 1987 meeting before the 1992 Earth Summit. By who? Grove, Harlan, Brundtland. Are you kind of getting the pieces of the puzzle here, and how this is all coming together? It was all a foregone conclusion. So those three treaties and this soft law document. Now, why in the world would this be soft law instead of another treaty? Or why wouldn't they just wrap all of this 300-page, 40-chapter blueprint into the climate change treaty? Why is it separate? Oh, we're going to see how it works together. Of course, George H.W. Bush knew that. That's why he signed those two documents, the only two he signed when he went to Rio de Janeiro. But, excuse me, a treaty has to have what approval under our U.S. Constitution? Right. 2/3 of the United States Senate has to approve a foreign treaty. If Agenda 21 is not a foreign treaty, then, gee, it doesn't have to have that requirement. There, we've just gone over hurdles that didn't have to exist. So, what in the world did we do in order to get it in our country if we have not ratified the Kyoto Protocol, and we haven't officially done anything? Well, it was the President's Council on Sustainable Development that was created with an executive order. 23 executive orders for guns. I mean, anybody in here who does not have your concealed handgun license, I suggest you go out and get one tomorrow. I mean, this is serious business, what he is doing, and what presidents have done to us over the years with executive orders. And I really hope that our Congress and these brilliant minds that we have now in the United States Senate will start doing something about these executive orders. I hope that they can find a way to do it. But anyway, in 1993, so that treaty was signed by Bush in 1992. Clinton signed it, sworn into office in 1993. He issues right away an executive order and implements sustainable development. And what is the handbook, the blueprint for implementing sustainable development? Agenda 21. So, its goal is economic, environmental, and social equity. I've gone over that once. You've got to keep hearing it. You've got to keep seeing it because that's key. You'll still find part of this online as far as the President's Council of Sustainable Development. Even though Clinton obviously is out of office and we had Bush in there for 8 years, none of the parts of this executive order were withdrawn. You've got to handily go in and remove. What President Reagan did was he used an executive order to direct the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to go into bureaucracies and get rid of the big government ideas, the largesse. So that is what has been done in the past. I was sure hoping that we would have a president to work with this time, but obviously that didn't work. Now, under this President's Council on Sustainable Development, there's a 16-point we believe statement. Now, most of us would look at that and say, well, it's an executive order, it's not law, so who cares what they believe? But look at some of these points. They talk about a collaborative decision-making process. And Katrina's already tipped us off to that whole idea of this collaborating. Mark Levin, if you were listening tonight on your way here, was talking about collaborating and all of the different times that Barack Hussein Obama, oh, guess what? The ACLU doesn't like it when I say Barack Hussein Obama. So I say it a lot. But anyway, collaborative decision-making process, and we'll see a bit more about that in a minute. And then another thing they want is integrated policies to achieve social, economic, and environmental equity. That's words right out of this We Believe statement, folks, that's implementing the President's Council on Sustainable Development, Agenda 21 in the United States of America. The U.S. should have policies and programs to stabilize global human population. Now, how many of you have bought the line that we are overpopulated? Thank you for not buying it. As a matter of fact, the world is pretty much shrinking. The whole European Union is not even reproducing its own population, and if it wasn't for immigration from other countries, they would be shrinking even worse than what they are now. The United Nations, however, every once in a while will come up with this big number. The latest one is the world now has 7 billion people. And how do they know? Because there was a little girl born in the Philippines and she was number 7 billion because they said so. Not because there's been a census done. They just come up with this. In order to control people, you've got to instill fear in them. And that's what this is all about. And then they also want to educate citizens to understand and support. Folks, you know what? When government comes after me from the top down like this and says, we need to educate you to support this, that's brainwashing, and I'm not interested. Interdependence, oh, am I weary of that word. I like independence. I don't like interdependence. Well, I told you we would explain a little bit about this decision-making process versus the democratic process. In the democratic process, we elect our officials, and then we hold them to account. Right, Randy Dunning? You were held to account, and the other elected officials in this room know likewise. But with the consensus process, there's no choice in who represents you. Right now in the European Union, the sovereign nations, or the once sovereign nations, I really should say, elect officials to represent them. Like Angela Merkel is elected to head this nation of Germany. Right. Well, the European Union is now writing over 80% of the law. You can have what you want. What is it you want again? I mean, they're so exhausted by that point. They don't even know what they're agreeing to. But there's no argument or debate, and it's spread by grants to every community. We're going to see more about that. Here is something that a grant funded the American Planning Association to create almost 1,500 pages, you see, called Smart Growth. And the common theme is government control of land use with no regard for private property rights. When you contrast that with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, folks, this has no place in our form of government whatsoever. But because it's coming from the top down instead of from the bottom up, people are confused about this. And that's the very basic, essential thing that is wrong with this whole system. An executive order imposes from the top down. The legislative process, the republic that we live in, we elect officials and hold them to account. It's a bottom up. If we want something, we need something, we know who to talk to. We have representatives that we elected and we hold to account. In this process, it's top down. It is not the process that we have in our Constitution. In 1976, the United Nations met, and I think it's very important that you hear what the United Nations thinks of private property rights. It says in this document, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of markets. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. The Environmental Protection Agency has what they call visioning projects, and this is another way of top-down implementing their agenda. They bring in stakeholder groups. You know how you're hearing that often now? We didn't used to hear that, did we? We had city council members. We had county commissioners. We had mayors. We had state representatives. Now we have stakeholders. Well, they come together and they have a facilitator. And let me give you an example. I went to a Dallas City Councilman's town hall meeting a few years ago. And as I arrived, I saw that the place was pretty full. And then we were broken into small groups, and I said, I know what comes next. The facilitator. And so we sat in these little groups, and they had a long sheet of paper in each one of the groups, and we were visioning what we wanted Dallas to look like. Why? Because they wanted us to approve a bond package. And so one person would say, well, I'd like a river running down Main Street. And someone else would say, yeah, and I want rowboats on that river. And somebody else would say, yeah, we don't want any cars down there. Another one would come up with another idea and another. This was what the facilitator listed. And then when it was all said and done, then they went around to each individual in the groups and said, how much bond package would you approve on the ballot? And every person in all the little groups came up with amounts, and they thought, well, I don't want to sound too cheap. I'll come up with, how about $80 million? It's only $80 million. And then they got to a little homemaker meeting. And said, Cathie, how much would you approve? I said, Zip, you've not made your case. I don't know how much a river's going to cost. I don't know how much even one rowboat costs. You didn't bring any prices. You didn't even bring a calculator. And as I was walking out that night, there was a man behind me who said, you know, I've got a degree in city planning, but I wasn't aware of this process, and I wish we'd talked before, because you're right, they didn't make their case. But you see, if you say Zip, you're looked at as the fool. They will single you out as being the person who is dumb and the person who doesn't want a beautiful death. And that is how the process works. And so it's much more than just an agenda. It's a process, and it's changing the way our government works. They want to preserve the environment. They want to save the wetlands. They want to restrict development. They want to designate cities. I can't tell you how many times we've killed scenic highways in Austin, Texas. And a Republican senator is the one who carries it every time. They don't know what they're doing. And somebody comes and sells them a bill of goods. So we've got to understand this, be engaged with our elected officials and hold them to account. Ickley, I'm so excited to hear that Richardson, Texas is no longer a part of Ickley.
Oh.
Neither is Irving, neither is Bryan, neither is Texas City, neither is College Station, neither is Garland, the first city in Texas to get out of it. What is Ickley? It is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Now, what can be local and international all at the same time? And let me tell you how this happened. The United Nations Environment Program saw these troublemakers out on the fruited plain who, after the people voted against something, went in there, rebel-roused, and got it done anyway. A few years ago, I remember in Plano, Texas, when the mayor wanted to buy this certain part of land, and some of the city council members did, and the people voted down the bond package for it. And they said, all right, we'll just go after a pot of money somewhere else. And they bought that land come heck or high water. They bought it. So how do you go around the people in order to get done what you want to get done if you've got a top-down plan instead of a bottom-up from the people? That's what they do. They break the rules, and that is what Ickley has been doing across the country for the last few years. And it is committed to sustainable development again. There's rules and regulations that are bankrupting us or robbing us of our private property rights. And so I'm so grateful for Katrina and many of you who have worked to get rid of these bad plans. Now, talking about executive orders, Barack Hussein Obama not only had 23 to get rid of our gun rights, he had, excuse me, an executive order about now a year and a half ago called the Rural Council. Why? Because if you can tell people that they shouldn't be living in suburbia, and that's why all these rail lines and things, you know, to get us off the road, and bicycle lanes, even when people in Arlington, Texas go door to door and say, we don't want them, and they put them in anyway. So if they can't control rural America, then that's leaving 16% of the American citizens out there outside their heavy iron clad control. And so they can't have that. And so Barack Obama issued this executive order in 2011. It took the Secretary of Agriculture and 25 departments, agencies, and offices over rural America to micromanage them as well. And as you and I are being dealt with in our cities and in our suburban communities. Anyway, the Department of Treasury is part of this, Department of Defense, Interior, Justice, Labor, Commerce. Look at all these different groups. And then there are more, as the President and the Secretary of Agriculture may, from time to time, designate. So he's either creating czars outside the purview of the Constitution. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know how much money they're spending. We don't know what their budgets are. We don't know what their salaries are. He's just by fiat making law. But how much of this was talked about during the presidential campaign? None of it. None of it. I thought what Senator Ted Cruz had to say was the most perfect statement. It was more bold than anything that Cathie could have ever come up with. He said, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney French kissed on that final debate. I thought, you cannot put it any more clear than that. And that is 1/6 side. So, what can you do? Always be polite and respectful, and we don't have any problems with that because we're Texans. But then we need to also share with our elected officials these couple of booklets that I do have here tonight if you're interested. And unfortunately, I don't have a money tree in my backyard, so I do sell them for their cost of $5. That would be the cost online if you want to purchase them there. But anyway, sustainable development or sustainable freedom, and that gives you most of the facts of what you've heard about Agenda 21 tonight. And the second one is confronting Agenda 21. And what is good about that is that it gives you an understanding of that Delphi process, that collaborative decision-making process, so that when you go into one of these meetings and they start to Delphi you, that you know how to respond and how to ask the right questions. And so that is the content of both of those books. If you're interested, and they're outside for sale, as I say, for $5 each. It's rarely productive to mention the United Nations. I mean, to us, it's like, well, if they are overstepping their bounds, and everyone knows that they haven't accomplished what they set out to do. I mean, you look at their lawn in New York City, and you've got a gun with a knot in its barrel. But we have mayhem going on. You know, even in Sudan, they created a new nation. They have it was 192 nations, now they have 193. They have now South Sudan. And it's because the Muslims are killing the Christians around the globe. And so they thought, well, we'll just create a nation for those Christians to be safe. And they're being killed now in South Sudan by the Muslims who are crossing the border. So the UN has never brought peace. We have more wars going on now around the globe than we did at the end of World War II when the UN was created. So instead of mentioning the United Nations, please talk about private property rights and free markets, because those are the two things that you're going to always have in common with your elected officials. And if you don't, then you don't have an elected official who understands government. And you really do need to talk with them or find possibly even someone to challenge them in an election. Because private property rights and free markets are basic to our American republic. These are things that we don't compromise on. And also, read your local proposal, and you will find most likely that it is very much like the Agenda 21 document. And then, is the plan mandated by state law? I put that question in there because I do not believe that we have a state law in Texas to mandate this. We have lots of busybodies out there writing laws. I just finished reading, my poor dad was just, I walked in after reading about 1,000 bills today, I think, and I saw him sitting in a chair and I jumped because my brain was still in reading all of these bills. But the Democrats folks are writing lots of bills trying to create a climate entity for the state of Texas, and also dealing with things like sustainable development, and the entire green agenda is being discussed in bills authored by Democrats. So we've got to be very careful about that. And I've got them all on my tracking list, so I will be letting you know. And I hope that list on the right and on the left is still going back, so please keep it going. But I think the last three questions are the most important, because then we hit our pocketbook. And our freedom. How will the plan be enforced? They have to take away things from you in order to implement these rules and regulations. They're taking away your liberty. They're taking away your property rights most often. And how much will it cost, and where is the funding going to come from? Does this mean a tax increase? So when you have those questions to present to your elected officials, you will have much in common with them. And oftentimes it's like, wow, the blinders just fell off. Now we can sit down and reason together. Let me just add one last thing. There are some communities that are being built as gated communities, and I live in one of those, I'm going to confess, and when we moved there, we knew what the rules and regulations were, and we bought into that. That was part of what we chose to do. The biggest problems are in retrofitting. And when I drive down Custer Road, and I can tell you, I can remember carpooling many, many years ago, and driving down Custer Road, we didn't have bike trails. I have yet to see a bike on Custer Road. Yeah. But they have a bike trail. So these are all things that are being implemented. It's costing you. It's costing you your liberty. It's costing you your property rights. And people are not asking for this. These are things being brought top down, not bottom up. So with that, I really appreciate you listening, and I would love to field your questions and also hear from you some of your own experiences. And I know you've got some exciting stories to tell. Thank you, and God bless you. And